I've probably mentioned 16 times or so that I am Jewish. And when you're a young Jewish kid in the diaspora, there isn't too much that's fun about it. You spend Saturday mornings in synagogue, whereas your Goyim friends are either watching cartoons or are running around the soccer field. On Christmas, all of your friends are getting the new Tony Hawk Pro Skater game, whereas you find yourself eating the last of your potato latkes leftovers. Then when you enter third grade and your mind is exhausted because your teachers break open those times tables, you get to spend weekday evenings learning Hebrew, a language no one you know actually speaks. However, when I was 6 years old, in January of 2000, I found out that it wasn't all bad. It was then I attended my cousin Neil's bar mitzvah, which was my first one. Okay, that isn't entirely true. I did attend my cousin Jeff Siegel's bar mitzvah in 1996, but I was 3 and don't really remember that one. Shout out, by the way, to Jeff, who just got married a few weeks ago. Anyways, between the dancing, the unlimited Coca-Colas, and hanging out with my cool, older cousins, I discovered the joy of the Jewish tradition that I could look forward to throughout the remainder of my childhood. I discovered something else that evening. As I mentioned back in the podcast's first episode, my cousin Neil, who's 7 years my senior, is the person I credit for getting me both into rock music as well as inspiring me to pick up the guitar. At his bar mitzvah, for a few brief minutes, he picked up the guitar, allowing the DJ to take 5. I think he only played one song. I think that because I only remember him playing one song. And I found that song beautiful. I liked it so much that 6.5 years later, I played it at my bar mitzvah. I'm sure you would like me to tell you the name of that song so we can end this intro and get to the meat of the episode, but I will do no such thing. So yeah, this really cool song that I became aware of at my cousin's bar mitzvah conveniently got stuck in my head, and a few weeks later while watching VH1 or MTV, I saw the music video of that particular song and thus found out the name of the song as well as the artist. A couple of years later, during the period of my life when my interest in music took a backseat to my interest in baseball, I was watching the Disney Channel original movie, The Luck of the Irish. It's a pretty out-of-pocket movie that follows some kid named Kyle who finds out he's Irish, and not only that, but also a leprechaun. On top of that, his lucky gold coin was stolen by another Irish dude leprechaun named Seamus, who is an evil leprechaun. Subsequently, Kyle has all kinds of bad luck because he's without his lucky coin. Seamus refuses to give back the coin, so naturally they are teleported to Ireland to engage in Gaelic sports in order to determine who gets the gold coin, only to be re-teleported to Kyle's high school gymnasium, where Kyle's basketball team plays Seamus and his evil leprechaun buddies. Kyle wins, even without his lucky coin. Way to go, bud. The reason I just gave a synopsis of a 23-year-old Disney Channel original movie with mixed reviews is because my dumbass 8-year-old brain thought the actor that played Seamus, shout out to Timothy Odmanson by the way, was the singer of the band of that song I had heard for the first time at my cousin Neil's bar mitzvah. So I thought that the singer of that band was one of those actor-singer people like my mother's beloved Barbra Streisand. Additionally, my clearly still developing brain thought that the singer of that band was Irish. So next time I saw my cousin, I asked him if all the members of that band were from Ireland. He looked utterly confused upon hearing my question. So I said something along the lines of, wait, their name has the color most associated with Ireland, so they have to be from there, right? He shook his head and said, quote, Dove, they're from California. Green Day is a reference to pot. I'm Dove Brenner, and this is Hot Cakes from a 90s Stand, and today I will ask the question, what is Green Day's signature 90s song? The story of Green Day began 22 years before they released arguably the most famous rock opera in modern music history. In 1982, in the cafeteria at Rodeo Elementary School in Rodeo, California, Billy Joe Armstrong befriended Mike Dirnt. The two buds, along with two other buds named Raj Punjabi and Sean Hughes, formed a band in the mid-80s called Sweet Children. Armstrong and Dirnt played guitar, Hughes rocked the bass, and Punjabi smacked the skins. Neither Punjabi nor Hughes lasted very long, as John Kiffmeyer, better known by his stage name El Sobrante, took over drummer duties in 1987, and I'm not sure what happened to Sean Hughes, but at some point Dirnt took over on bass, leaving Armstrong as the sole guitarist and vocalist of the group. Sweet Children started making a name for themselves performing around the Bay Area, most notably at the iconic music club 924 Gilman Street. In 1989, now defunct independent label Lookout Records signed Sweet Children, though the band opted to change their name to Green Day to avoid confusion with Sweet Baby, another popular local band that frequently had gigs at 924 Gilman Street. As I alluded to earlier, Green Day was a colloquial term in the Bay Area, meaning spending the day smoking marijuana. On April 13, 1990, Green Day released their debut album, 39/Smooth. Other than my fandom of the Ramones, I'm not too familiar with the 70s and 80s punk scene, so I'm not quite sure how to characterize their debut record, but I would describe it as fast-paced, yet not aggressive. I would also call it accessible, yet not quite ready for mainstream rock radio due to the choppiness of the production and amateurish technical skill levels of the band. Following the album's release, El Sobrante left the band to pursue a university experience. Green Day filled the vacancy with German-born drummer Frank Edwin Wright III, better known as Tré Cool, who made a name for himself playing drums in the late 80s for a band named The Lookouts. If you notice a similarity in the name of Green Day's record label and Tré Cool's first band, it's not a coincidence. The founder and frontman of The Lookouts, Larry Livermore, is also the founder of Lookout Records. Somewhat irrelevant but fun fact, he also founded Lookout Magazine. So I guess Larry likes the word lookout or likes to look out at things. I don't fucking know. So due to Livermore's association with both Green Day and Tré Cool, the band didn't have to dig too deep to find their new drummer. Also, another fun fact about the drummer's nickname, Tré comes from the Spanish word tres, which of course means three. So the nickname emphasizes quote-unquote the third in his legal name of Frank Edwin Wright III. In May of 1991, the new lineup headed to the Art of Ear studio in San Francisco to begin work on their second studio album, and their last on Lookout, the album titled Kerplunk. Due to their budget restraints, they only had a few sessions to record the entirety of the album. Andy Ernst handled the album's production. While early in his career he had already worked with Green Day, he would go on to work with renowned punk rock bands such as Rancid and AFI. After the band wrapped up sessions with Ernst in the early fall of '91, Green Day flew out to Europe for a tour they anticipated as simply an opportunity to gain exposure. However, it certainly turned out rather wild. According to Kerrang, the band's van caught fire at one point. In Germany, someone pulled a gun on them, and 3 days before Christmas, they incorporated a nativity scene into their live gig with Tré Cool playing Baby Jesus. On September 17, 1991, Green Day released some of the copies of the album they received in Southampton, England, and made their gig that evening a somewhat unofficial album release party. January 17, 1992, they released Kerplunk for Real. Green Day's sophomore release showcases an exponential level of improvement. A rather straightforward pop-punk effort, Kerplunk is far more polished and cohesive. Instrumentally, it appears that Tré Cool's drumming was the special sauce missing from their debut record. Also, shout out to Green Day for trying out country on the album's 6th track, regardless of whether it was ironic or not. Apparently, within less than 24 hours of release, the local punk rock band no one had ever heard of had already sold 10,000 copies, and by the end of '92, Kerplunk had sold roughly 50,000 copies. Spurred on by the success of future releases, the album currently has sold north of 4 million copies. Kerplunk received positive reviews overall from critics. While contemporary reviews were limited to less mainstream music magazines, retrospective reviews from publications such as AllMusic and Pitchfork hold the album in high esteem, with the former awarding Kerplunk with 4 out of 5 stars and the latter giving it a score of 8.5 out of 10. Ned Raggett of AllMusic opened his review of Kerplunk praising it as, quote, the perfect dry run for the band's later assault on the mainstream. With the promising results of the band's second album, major labels started catching on to Green Day's potential, and the whining and dining began. They received offers from the biggest of the big, including Geffen and Columbia, but the early 20-somethings turned them all down. They needed someone to speak their language. That's where junior A&R rep Rob Cavallo of Reprise Records came in. Green Day's sound impressed Cavallo, who felt the band sounded like a blend of the Beatles and the Ramones. He gave the band a call and met them at their practice space where they got stoned, jammed for a bit, and just chatted about music. Green Day ultimately agreed to sign with Reprise. Armstrong, Dirt, and Trey Cool headed to Fantasy Studios in Berkeley to record their third studio album. The band arrived with basically an album's worth of material, which made the recording process fairly easy. Green Day spent only 3 weeks in the studio. While they were preparing the album, they returned to their old stomping ground of 924 Gilman Street. However, the punk scene did not take the news of the band signing to a major label well. So the local punk scene basically boycotted the band, resulting in minimal attendance at that show. Subsequently, the venue banned Green Day from performing. On February 1st, 1994, the band released Dookie. The title, of course, slang for fecal matter. The record contains 38 minutes of pop-punk magic. Commercially, the album stumbled a bit out of the gate, perhaps due to their first single Longview not being released until the date of the album released. However, as February turned into March and Longview's video enjoyed full rotation coupled with their performances on late-night television, Dookie began to become an international superhit. 3 of the album's 4 singles, including Longview, became number 1 hits on the rock charts. Dookie peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 200 albums chart, and to date has sold roughly a whopping 20 million copies. It ranks as the 34th highest-selling album of the 1990s. Critics fell in love with Dookie, receiving perfect scores from AllMusic, The Alternative Press, and the Rolling Stone Album Guide. The album actually garnered a positive review from the hard-to-please Village Voice writer Robert Christgau, who awarded the album a grade of A-. You'll probably already know that the list of Dookie's accolades reads long, but some of the highlights include Spin Magazine ranking it as number 44 on their list of the greatest albums released between 1985 and 2005. In addition, Rolling Stone readers voted it the best album of 1994, and if you remember my third episode, there was quite a bit of competition that year. In December of 1994, Green Day entered Hyde Street Studios in San Francisco to begin the daunting task of putting together a follow-up to Dookie. Between the exhausting 10-month tour to support the band's breakthrough album and the fallout from getting banned from 924 Gilman Street, the band's mental health was in a precarious state. This adversity manifested itself on their 4th studio album titled Insomniac, released on October 10, 1995. The lyricism feels darker than its predecessors, with lines throughout like, quote, "Well, I know I'm not alright," as well as, quote, "I'm on a roll, no self-control, I'm blowing steam with methamphetamine," and, quote, "There's a plague inside of me eating at my disposition." The aggressive instrumentals complement the uneasy lyrics well, making Insomniac perhaps the most punk rock album in Green Day's discography. The abrasive nature, in part, lends itself to the thickness of Armstrong's guitar tone, uniquely designed by Bob Bradshaw at Custom Audio Electronics. Trey Cool also contributed to the album's demeanor, playing with such intensity that at one point he tore calluses on his hands, which the album's producer Rob Cavallo described as, quote, "a bloody mess." I personally think Insomniac is a brilliant album and a solid follow-up to Dookie, but consumers and to an extent critics didn't quite agree. While the album matched its predecessor's peak of number 2 on the Billboard Hot 200, album sales paled in comparison. While Insomniac has sold just south of 6 million copies worldwide, not too shabby in the slightest, Dookie's massive success diminished that typically large figure a bit. Come to think of it though, I may have been a bit dramatic about the album's quote-unquote lack of success. The album spawned 3 singles, 2 of which did become top 3 hits on the rock charts, and while reviews of the album were mixed, I suppose, I'd probably say they overall swung to the positive side. Rolling Stone gave the album 3.5 stars out of 5, Spin Magazine awarded the album a score of 8 out of 10, and our friend Robert Christgau gave Insomniac a grade of A-. Eric Weisbart of Spin praised Trey Cool's drumming, comparing it to the likes of rock legend Keith Moon. David Brown of Entertainment Weekly awarded the album a grade of B. He praised the band's loyalty to their roots, commenting, quote, "Green Day sound exactly the same as on their first album, albeit with crisper production and, ominously, a palpable degeneration in their sense of humor." In the spring of 1996, in the midst of their European tour, feeling burnt out, the band canceled the remainder of their tour and headed home. Before returning to the studio, Green Day used some much-needed and well-deserved time off. The band regrouped at Conway Studios in Los Angeles in March of 1997. While recording, they opted to stay at the Sunset Marquis in West Hollywood. The grueling 14-hour days in the studio left the band in need of blowing off steam. This led to Green Day engaging in quite debaucherous behavior while staying at the luxury hotel. They drank heavily and made poor drunken choices. For example, one of the members played Ding Dong Ditch in the nude within the hallways of the hotel. Also, Trey Cool thought it would be a good idea to throw a TV out of the hotel window. That said, they appeared to be rather focused on the music side of things. Billy Joe Armstrong wanted to make a diverse record, focusing more on his songwriting. He approached this through writing each song on the acoustic guitar before altering the instrumentation to accommodate Mike Dirnt and Trey Cool. The band also incorporated influences such as The Who and The Clash, artists far from their usual sound of punk rock. Dirnt mentioned the band's intention of producing a more fragmented album centering on the spirit of each song rather than a more cohesive overall project such as their previous 90s albums. Green Day released their fourth studio album, titled Nimrod, on October 14, 1997. The record's name comes from Nimrod, the biblical character that was the great-grandson of Noah and known for his master hunting skills. Though over the years, the term has become a synonym for idiot or buffoon, following its 1948 use in the Looney Tunes to refer to Elmer Fudd. But I digress. The album met the aim of the band with clearly their most diverse album up to that point. The overall feel of the record gravitates towards pop-punk, perhaps their most polished-sounding effort of the 90s. However, other vibes on the album include surf rock, pop rock, hardcore punk, ska, and most notably, folk. Lyrically, Billy Joe Armstrong really outdoes himself. Much like the songwriting legend John Prine, Armstrong evokes humor in the bleakest of subject matters without compromising the severity of the topic. That's right, I just compared John Prine to Billy Joe Armstrong. Fight me. I would mention all the different facets of Armstrong lyricism on the album, but ain't nobody got time for that. Let's just say he has a song about a grumpy old man that, quote, drank a six-pack of apathy, right before a tender love song he wrote for his wife where he describes himself as redundant because saying, I love you to her simply doesn't communicate the depth of how he feels for her. Initially, as a sucker for cohesive albums, I was put off a bit by the fragmentation of Nimrod. However, after learning the intentions of the band for the album, I gave the elusive nod of approval. Commercially, the album saw the band take a slight step back, peaking only at number 10, though to date with its 5.2 million copies sold, it only lags a bit behind the sales of its predecessor. Green Day released 4 singles from Nimrod, 2 of which cracked the top 5 on the rock charts, the most successful of the 2 being the folk tune Good Riddance in parentheses Time of Your Life, which peaked at number 2. Critics largely viewed the record positively. Stephen Thomas Erlewine of AllMusic gave Nimrod 3.5 stars out of 5, praising their experimentalism, stating, quote, although punk pop is Green Day's forte, they sound the most alive on Nimrod when they're breaking away from their formula. Jesse Raub of the Alternative Press awarded the album 4.5 stars out of 5, noting the band's maturity, saying, quote, it seems hard to believe that this is the same band that recorded hokey-jokey immature country song Dominated Love Slave on Kerplunk. The 4 studio 90s albums Green Day released after their debut for sure take up sacred space in the time capsule for that decade. Like my beloved Red Hot Chili Peppers, they are both a 90s band as well as an icon of the aughts. However, unlike the Chili Peppers, Green Day became almost a completely different band entering the 21st century. Their follow-up to Nimrod, Warning, was basically a folk rock album, and of course their monumentally successful 2004 rock opera American Idiot saw them re-enter the level of stardom achieved on Dookie. I never really listened to their 2009 album 21st Century Breakdown, but I'm pretty sure that's also a rock opera, so on par with their 2000s ethos. So now it's time to consider, of all the revered classics, which is Green Day's signature 90s tune. As is tradition, when considering Green Day's signature 90s song, I listened to an anthology of their most streamed songs on Spotify released in the 1990s. Unlike some of the other artists I've covered, the signature sound of Green Day formed rather quickly due to the general cohesion of their most popular 90s tunes. Musically, I noticed their label of pop punk rock is not a misnomer. The vast majority of the anthology carries upbeat songs. According to the renowned academic that is the Google search, the beats per minute for punk rock songs tends to exceed 150. The median BPM for the Green Day anthology was 167. For the guitar, as in classic pop-punk fashion, Billy Joe Armstrong pounds out the power chords frequently and aggressively. For those non-guitar players, rock and metal guitar players will often take the root of the chord on either the A or the low E string and add the fifth, which can be found on the string below. Basically, what that does is create a low, thick, and powerful sound, hence the name power chord. Okay, there's your guitar lesson for the day. Anyways, another thing I noticed, Trey Cool is a raging monster on the drums. I always knew he could hold his own on the drums, but my god, some of his fills are gnarly as hell. Side note real quick, when I first learned the name of Green Day's frontman, I couldn't help but notice the similarity between it and the name of New York singer-songwriting legend Billy Joel. That similarity is relevant because in his 1974 hit single, The Entertainer, Billy Joel reflects on his iconic breakout hit, Piano Man. He sings, quote, "It took me years to write it. They were the best years of my life. It was a beautiful song, but it ran too long. If you're gonna have a hit, you gotta make it fit, so they cut it down to 3:05. It seems like Green Day must have heard that last part, because basically every song on the anthology falls under that length. Now, of course, punk rock tends to have shorter songs, but I like my theory better. Anyways, on the songwriting side, I always knew that Billy Joe Armstrong was a good songwriter, but after really diving into the anthology, I discovered his level of songwriting brilliance. Of the 90s alternative rock bands, Green Day ranks among the top in terms of well-written songs. Billy Joe Armstrong clearly paid attention in his high school English classes because he demonstrates quite a strong command of literary devices. His use of imagery, metaphors, and double entendres really bring the otherwise catchy tunes to a higher echelon. Another feather in the cap of Armstrong's songwriting is his use of humor. Sometimes it's dark, sometimes it's light, sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's overt, but it's usually there in one form or another. In terms of topics, within the anthology, more often than not, he discusses mental health. Also, he likes to mention drugs. So for their signature 90s song, I sought one that is upbeat around that 3-minute mark with power chords galore and Trey Cool absolutely annihilating the Skins. Lyrically, I figured a well-written, humorous song about mental health that mentions drugs in some form would do the trick. While I did engage in some internal debate, I ultimately settled on one and feel quite confident that y'all won't have a quibble with it. I could have picked When I Come Around, the fourth single from their breakthrough album Dookie. The song's popularity both upon release and in present day cannot be denied. The tune peaked at number 1 on the rock charts in the US, but also charted high around the world in countries including Australia, Canada, Denmark, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. Additionally, the song possesses north of 520 million streams on Spotify. Unlike most of Dookie, When I Come Around contains more of a standard alt-rock vibe than a pop-punk one, since it's not nearly as up-tempo as some of the others on the record. Honestly, I don't have too much to say about this song. It's pretty simple and catchy, though we do get a rare guitar solo from Armstrong, which is pretty cool. Lyrically, of the entire anthology, I found the song most underwhelming. In the tune, the narrator essentially explains to his romantic interest that he's only interested in a fling, much to the chagrin of the girl as she is seeking something more serious. The narrator basically comes off as mansplaining the situation to the girl. I'll give the benefit of the doubt to Armstrong and conclude that he's trying to make the narrator look like a dick, but who knows. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoy the song and understand why it's so beloved within the Green Day and alt-rock/pop-punk community, but it's missing so many factors that I identify with classic Green Day. I honestly never even considered it as the band's signature 90s song. I could have picked Brain Stew, the third single from Insomniac, released in joint form with the song's following track on the album titled Jaded. Perhaps one of their most popular songs released in the 90s, the song currently has over 232 million streams on Spotify and upon release enjoyed great success on North American rock radio with a peak at number 3 on the US rock charts. In addition, it topped the rock charts in Canada. Known for the riff, which I would describe as power chord heaven, it's not only considered Green Day's most recognizable riff within their discography, but in my humble opinion ranks among the greatest in rock music history, up there with Smoke on the Water, Heartbreaker, Iron Man, etc. Besides Armstrong's catchy as fuck riff, he drives the song's instrumental chorus with aggressive syncopated muting. He carries that dynamic into the third verse where his guitar rhythm gets funky. That, combined with heavy distortion, leads me to label Brainstew as, dare I say, funk metal. The tune ends with a dark and explosive outro jam, in which Tré Cool tests the limit on how many times his fills can include just obliterating the crash cymbals. The song's lyrical theme relates directly to the album's name. The song centers on Armstrong's insomnia resulting from crystal meth use. As expected with a topic of that nature, the imagery is rough and the humor is dark. The opening lines, quote, "I'm having trouble trying to sleep, I'm counting sheep but running out," set the tone for the humorous yet scary circus-like 3 minutes. The most emblematic example of that description comes at the beginning of the third verse, when Armstrong exclaims, quote, "My mind is set on overdrive, the clock is laughing in my face." Also, important to note, the vocal inflection he does on the word face is pungent as hell. Truth be told, I wanted Brainstew so badly to be Green Day's signature song, but as Matt Lule, the guest on our third episode, once told me, this podcast is quote-unquote quasi-academic. Therefore, my objective analysis must reign supreme. And since I can't define this wonderfully abrasive tune as particularly upbeat, unfortunately, I can't name Brainstew as Green Day's signature 90s song. I could have picked Longview, the lead single from Dookie, which is perhaps the only Green Day hit driven by Mike Dirnt's bass line. Topping the rock charts, the song not only has become one of Green Day's biggest singles of the 90s, but with over 145 million streams on Spotify, it has remained a fan favorite. Musically, the song is a tale of two cities. The verses are mellow and essentially just feature the rhythm section and vocals. And the chorus gets gnarly, with Billy Joe Armstrong playing guitar the only way you would think he knew how in 1994, aggressively. But if you're familiar with this iconic 90s tune, you're here to hear me discuss Billy Joe Armstrong's less than tasteful lyrics. Maybe the most enunciated and humorous Armstrong gets, he details staying home, being lazy, and engaging in self-pleasure until it's no longer enjoyable. So in other words, it's a self-loathing anthem about not doing jack shit. Some of the activities Armstrong participates in his linear narrative include watching TV, twiddling his thumbs, smoking weed, staring at the telephone, and of course, masturbating. Some of my favorite lines in this poetic masterpiece include, from the chorus, quote, "I'm so damn bored, I'm going blind, and I smell like shit." As well as, from the second verse, quote, "I'm feeling like a dog in heat, barred indoors from the summer street." And of course, from the third verse, quote, "My mother says to get a job, but she don't like the one she's got. When masturbation's lost its fun, you're fucking lonely." While I love the song with a burning passion and understand its sacred place amongst 90s rock, a few things kept me from seriously considering it as Green Day's signature 90s song. The first being, while it certainly can't be considered a slow song by any means, it doesn't have the raw punk feel that I deem necessary for Green Day's signature sound. In addition, though I'm never going to complain about Green Day giving me extra time to enjoy their music, at nearly 4 minutes, Longview definitely exceeds the length I'd feel comfortable allotting for The Crown. And finally, while I adore the funny lyrics that references the drug the band is named after, Armstrong doesn't really touch on mental health, a topic necessary for the label of Green Day's signature song. Now, for my somewhat hot take of the episode, I could have picked, but didn't, Good Riddance, in parentheses, Time Your Life, the second single from Nimrod. Easily one of Green Day's most recognizable songs from any era of their illustrious discography. This song saw the band take a radical departure from alternative rock as Tré Cool and Mike Dirnt are absent from the song and Armstrong puts down his electric guitar in favor of the acoustic. The folk song became an international success. In addition to peaking at number 2 on the rock charts and number 5 on the year-end rock charts, Good Riddance became a top 40 pop hit in Canada, Iceland, Ireland, New Zealand, and the UK. In the present day, it remains one of their most popular tunes with nearly 700 million streams on Spotify. The mellow tune features perhaps Armstrong's strongest 90s vocal performance. Instrumentally, the beginning of the song features arpeggiated acoustic guitar, but subtly and gradually builds instrumentation, ultimately featuring folk guitar strumming and an orchestral arrangement. While Good Riddance is a relatively slower and more tender song for the pop punk trio, the song originally had been recorded during Dookie sessions with just guitar and vocals and a faster tempo, giving it folk punk vibes. Green Day producer Rob Cavallo didn't think the song fit on Dookie, nor did he think it belonged on Insomniac, so that rendition ended up on the 1996 limited edition CD release of Brain Stew/Jaded. Armstrong wrote the song about his girlfriend in the early 90s, who ended the relationship when she moved to Ecuador. The song details Armstrong's reflections on coping with loss, moving forward, and making sense of a tough breakup. While the chorus is a bit sarcastic, the rest of the song stays pretty sincere. Armstrong pens some really profound lines, such as the beginning of the first verse when he sings, quote, "Another turning point, a fork stuck in the road, time grabs you by the wrist, directs you where to go." The song's memorable chorus that reads, quote, "It's something unpredictable, but in the end is right. I hope you had the time of your life," led the song to become a cultural phenomenon. The song found its way into hit TV shows such as Seinfeld, ER, and Family Guy. In addition, Good Riddance has become a prom staple and frequently makes its way to high school graduations. In fact, I performed the song at my 8th grade graduation, and my friend and water polo teammate Kevin DiClemente, shout out by the way, played it at our high school graduation. That's right, I played water polo. I was a jock, kinda. Also, fun fact, Good Riddance is the Green Day song that I heard at my cousin's bar mitzvah in January of 2000. So, if this tune ranks as their biggest crossover hit pre-American Idiot, why isn't it their signature 90s song? Well, the answer is rather simple. It's a folk song from a punk rock band. I appreciate Mike Dirnt saying that releasing the song was the quote-unquote most punk thing they could have done. While I'm not disputing that, I think he's referring to the culture, not the sound. Additionally, while a beautiful number, I can't even identify any other significant 90s Green Day tunes that resemble Good Riddance. Plus, I said earlier that the signature song has to feature Trey Cool throwing in some rad fills. Well, Trey Cool isn't even included on the song, so while Good Riddance is many things, brave, iconic, memorable, emotional, one thing it is not, Green Day's signature 90s song. Well, that was an unnecessarily long rant about a song that didn't even win the crown. Anyways, now the moment y'all have been waiting for. Probably an unsurprising choice, but after careful consideration, the signature 90s song of the iconic pop-punk band Green Day easily goes to Basket Case, the second single from Dookie. Upon release in August of 1994, the song became an instant success, peaking at number 1 on the rock charts. Outside of the US, the song entered the top 20 in Canada, Denmark, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the UK. Now, back on the podcast's first episode, I mentioned that an artist's most popular song doesn't necessarily make it their signature song, though that status certainly doesn't preclude it from garnering that label. Case in point, Basket Case, which currently ranks as Green Day's most streamed song on Spotify with over 1 billion streams, making it the first signature song on this show to have that many plays. On the music side, even without listening to the song, I can tell that Armstrong strums power chords the entire song because the key is in E flat, and if you're a guitar player, you know that playing power chords is the only way to play in that key without terrorizing your wrist. The song begins with 30 seconds plus of just Billy Joe Armstrong playing guitar and singing, but at the 37-second mark, on the word think, Trey Cool and Mike Dirnt come in and launch the song from 0 to 60. The rest of the song is unadulterated pop-punk ecstasy. You'd be hard-pressed to find a single unmemorable second of this upbeat tune, whose tempo remains at 175 beats per minute. While the in-your-face vocals, which I'll discuss in 1 second, are catchy as fuck, the real MVP of the song goes to Trey Cool, who performs like a goddamn madman on this song. His quickness maintains the energy throughout, and he never misses an opportunity to deliver intricate fills at blazing speeds. Armstrong wrote the catchy melody sometime in the band's early days while high on crystal meth. He actually wrote an entire love song, which at the time he thought was the greatest song until he came down from the drug and thought it was terrible. Eventually, when the band started writing songs for Dookie, Armstrong gave the melody another shot, but with very different lyrical content. In Basket Case, Armstrong hilariously details his attempts to thwart the perils of his panic disorder. Perhaps the best use of dark humor in their entire discography. If you're not laughing by the end of the chorus where he asks, quote, "Am I just paranoid or am I just stoned?" You'll probably begin cracking up during the song's second verse, in which Armstrong chronicles venturing out into the community to handle his anxiety. The famous second verse goes, quote, "I went to a shrink to analyze my dreams. She says it's lack of sex that's bringing me down. I went to a whore. He said my life's a bore. So quit my whining, 'cause it's bringing her down." So as much as I enjoy making hot takes, with the song's fast pace, crunchy power chords, thundering drum track, and of course, its economical length of 3 minutes and 1 second, along with Armstrong's humorous lyrics that creatively describe the experience of mental health issues, it's a no-brainer that Basket Case is Green Day's signature 90s song. The last time the man I will be talking to in just a second was on the podcast, I told him the next time he joins the podcast, I would introduce him as the official co-host. Well, here he is.
I'm back.
He's the Ed McMahon to my Johnny Carson. He's the Paul Schaefer to my David Letterman. Also, by the way, when I say he's the official co-host, I mainly mean he's the person that I rely on to come on and discuss artists that no one else wanted to talk about. Regardless, please welcome the co-host of Hot Cakes from a 90s Stan, Ryan Gilman.
These intros keep getting better and better. I notice that every time I'm on. Well, I'm honored to be the official co-host now. It's about damn time. I'm going to say that right now, but it's good to be back.
Was that a Lizzo reference?
It wasn't, but I saw the South Park episode this week, and nobody will stop talking about it. So it's funny you brought that up because I did.
I was gonna say Lizzo is clearly not 90s, so you know.
She wasn't part of any of the homework I was doing before this.
but anyways, how's Elle the cat doing?
She's good, man. I'm trying to think. We abandoned her for like 4 days prior to this weekend, the long weekend, as we traveled back to see my family. So we came back, and I swear she meowed more than she'd ever meowed in her life. And she's like a very quiet cat. So it was obvious that we'd abandoned her for a better part of a week, and she was happy to see us.
Now, two things. Because I would love the audience to hear. How does your cat consume water?
Oh, we put out like people glasses, you know, the stuff that you guys drink out of, and we put it on the floor. So like, you know, it's like a glass on the floor, and we keep like 3 of them probably around just because, you know, she doesn't want to drink out of one. She needs, she needs one closer to her at all, positions that she likes to lay in around the house. So we like to make it easy.
I love that so much. I just remember the first time I was there, I was just like, Ryan, why is there like a beer glass filled with water on the floor? Like, what is going on here? And you're like, oh, it's for the cat.
I mean, sometimes I get down there too, but
can I tell the story of Elle's UTI?
Yeah, go for it.
At band practice. So we're at band practice, and as you guys know, Ryan, not only the co-host of Hot Cakes from a 90s Stan, but also is a bandmate of mine. And so we're at band practice, and he's talking about his cat, Elle's UTI. Now, I knew he had a cat, but I didn't know the cat's name. So when he said Elle, I thought he said Al, which is, nickname sometimes referred to his wife, Allie. So he starts talking about, what I hear is Al's UTI. I was like, Ryan, why are you talking about your wife's UTI, like, in front of, like, 4 other people? Like, isn't that, like, very private, intimate, like, information? He's like, no, I'm talking about my cat, Elle.
No, that's something we at band practice just talk about. Jeez. Who else am I tell people?
Just casually talking about, our pets, health problems. Although I definitely, like, anytime Josie's having diarrhea, I tell you all.
Oh, yeah.
It's very important.
We know how, if she's had a good or bad day, every time. It's usually within the first 5 minutes when you're doing your stretches. I know how Josie's doing, so.
Oh, yeah. Well, if any dog owner, the quality of their life is directly correlated with how their dog's poops are. If it's solid and like not too dense, but like a good level, then like they're going to be in a great mood. But if it's loose, it's a rough time to be a dog.
If you're in rhythm, you're in rhythm, baby.
All right. So I completely apologize. I did not intend for the direction of the conversation to go there, but here we are. Anyways, as obviously we're going to be talking about Green Day today. Now, your name is Ryan Gilman. You know that you're the perfect person to have as a guest. You know why you're the perfect person to have as a guest for Green Day?
I don't know, man. I mean, there's a reason they're named the way they are, and I feel like I can. I don't know if it's on this podcast it's okay to admit that, but I'll say I have a connection with them.
Okay, so I would say that is true, but I could have found, how many people I could have found to that, have that connection with them. No. So, and I talk about it a lot in the monologue, but 924 Gilman Street
Yeah,
was,
that's a way better reason.
yeah,
That's a
was
way better
as,
reason.
yeah, as, so, but you know about that, right?
Yeah, so that was in California, right, with where all the punk bands were kind of playing, and they were in that scene, right? And then that's kind of
Yes.
how they got their beginnings, I guess you could say.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, oh, I didn't never put two and two together. I was like, Ryan's gonna be on. His last name is Gilman, and the story of Green Day cannot be told without 924 Gilman.
Yeah, man.
But anyways, let's get into it. So before we talk about Green Day, what music have you been listening to recently?
Let's see. I've been letting Spotify do a lot of the heavy lifting because it's been a lot of work on my end, boring. So I won't talk too much about that. But I've been doing a lot of just like letting them make the playlist for me, and it's a lot of rap. It's a lot of actually new rock. Bring Me the Horizons. They're like a heavier band. They just dropped a new album at least in the past week, so I was kind of kicking it to that today while I was working. And then over the weekend, when I mentioned I went home, I got a chance to see my dad's cover band, which does the Grateful Dead, and they knocked it out of the park. So it got me listening to the Dead a little bit again too. So a little bit of everything, I guess you could say.
Oh, we love that. We love a good throwback. And I know I know that you, obviously the Grateful Dead, they are the quintessential jam band. Are you into any other jam bands, or?
Honestly, they're the big one. I flirted with Fish for a little bit, but I don't know. There's something about the Dead being able to kind of rope it back and bring it into a big sing-along chorus that a lot of other jam bands can't quite do. So I wouldn't say I've gotten too far into any other jam bands other than them.
Gotcha. So let's get started with Green Day. And the first question, I gotta ask it. It was like when I had, my guess for Tupac. I was like Biggie or Tupac, right? I gotta get out of the way. Do you prefer American Idiot or Dookie?
So I know we won't be talking about it as much, but personally, I prefer American Idiot because that's kind of what I was raised on, I guess you could say. I know that was a huge kind of theme of American Idiot. Obviously, Green Day had been around for a little bit. They came back, and that album was, known for being liked by kids, essentially, and that's kind of where I was at the time. I think it dropped when I was in 6th grade, and I'll never forget. It was my first.
No. I was in 6th grade. You would have been in 3rd grade.
I was in 3rd
Yeah.
grade. Well, maybe it was. You're right. I think it was a couple years after the album dropped then, because I just remember I got an iPod and everyone was listening to that album, and I'm like, okay, I'm a loser if I'm not listening to Green Day, I guess. But I remember at PE, that was the one place you're allowed to bring your iPod out when you run the mile, and everyone's listening to that album.
Whoa. You guys were able to listen to your iPod when you ran the mile?
Yeah, dude. If it made you run quicker.
We were able to do no such thing.
It was a monumental achievement, I would say. A lot of the kids, because that was also the point in time where it was getting more normal for kids to have cell phones. Obviously, the iPod was relatively new at that point, but it was kind of a weird place to imagine for teachers. Like, you don't want to allow them to have it, but at the same time, if they're running 5-minute miles while doing this stuff, then why not?
Well, I was in high school where, cell phones just became something that everyone had. And not only cell phones, but before there were the smartphones, the flip phones with the keyboards and whatnot. So texting was super prominent. Teachers had no idea. Administrators had no idea how to handle that. So, and it was, I think the iPod, what did it came out, or the iPhone came out in 2007.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that was when I was a freshman, but I feel like most people didn't start having them until probably a few years later.
Yeah, that iPhone 5 was like where everybody kind of just got it. I fell behind. I didn't mind until I was 18, but that's a story for a different day.
I promise, folks, we will talk about music today. I promise.
But to come back a little bit and actually answer your question, I'm a big American Idiot guy, but I understand Dookie's like the OG. I guess.
Yeah, I don't know which one I prefer. If I'll think now, I'm gonna. It's like American Idiot. That was the album that really got me into Green Day.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really get into Dookie until I covered it on the podcast a few months ago. Obviously, I knew the hits. But like in its entirety, I guess like they're just like completely different. But life or death kind of choice. I guess I go to American Idiot. Because that was, I think I told you about, but I wrote a rock opera when I was in college, and that was like the big inspiration for me to do that. And also just like the lyricism on that album is pretty incredible, and it's just such a brilliant album. Jesus of Suburbia, like
Oh my
that's
gosh,
God. Like it's one of those things like that, like listening to that song, or all 5 parts of it, that really, it's like a time machine. It brings me back. I'm back in 6th grade again,
Yep.
And that was the album that I listened to on repeat when I moved from New York to Florida. So it brings me back to that, and we drove. So like, it just brings me back to that drive, and it's wild how music works in that regard. But when did you hear Green Day for the first time? Was that it?
Ooh, so I think I heard about them earlier. And to your point, it was 3rd grade. I remember there's this guy named Jerry in my class. He comes in and he's like, guys, I just found this cool band named Green Day. You got to listen to this stuff. And like, at that point in time, maybe I was sheltered. I wasn't watching any MTV. I wasn't, obviously at that point, it was before I was allowed to have a phone or iPod. So I didn't really have a way of getting there without a computer, which I didn't get till a couple years later. I'd heard about them, but I really, like I said, didn't start listening to them until middle school. But I knew of their presence, I guess, in elementary. And that's kind of, I guess, where it's that weird age thing where it's like, man, if I was around, I would have been so into it.
Yeah. Well, I do kind of wonder. It's like if I grew up, if I was 10 years older, would I been blasting Dookie?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but whenever somebody asks me like, what's the cutoff year for Gen Z and millennial, I don't know the answer to it, but 2 faces come up, and it's you and Sarah, and I'm just like, are they Gen Z? Are they millennial? Are they Gen Z millennial? I don't know. So I don't know if you were a Gen Z or millennial, but being on the border between the two, and you talk about, just like me, you got into them with American Idiot. Now I'm 3 years older, so before American Idiot, I wasn't familiar with their discography, but I was familiar with their existence. Mm-hmm. So for you, being a little bit younger, did you know of their prominence in the 90s?
So, also to your point about the Gen Z millennial thing, Allie and I joke around that the cutoff's actually May 20th, 96, because she's the 19th and I'm the 23rd, and we're very different. I'll just leave it at that as far as how we act and our maturity levels. But yeah, I actually wasn't aware that they really had this whole thing going on in the 90s when I first started listening to them. At that point, I thought American Idiot kind of was their thing, and it wasn't until, like you kind of mentioned, you got into them a few months ago, and even me, I guess the last couple of years, I knew about Dookie, and I've been listening to all the big hits for a while, but it wasn't until this point in my life where I was like, oh, wait a minute, there was this whole thing in the 90s where they were pretty big, and they were there at Woodstock 94 throwing mud at people. Like, they're actually kind of big before this.
Well, it's like, I was reading from multiple sources, just kind of like preparing for this episode, and when Dookie came out, all the critics were like, this band is the next Nirvana. Mm-hmm. And then you look at it like Dookie, I'm pretty sure Dookie sold more copies than American Idiot.
Yeah.
So it really points, I mean, they had like a little bit of a steady decline in terms of like commercial success throughout the 90s, but like they were, I mean, as big as anybody in 94.
Yeah. And I remember like either reading or hearing about this, but like that was their first commercial record, right? Because they had 2 or 3 albums come out before that. 2 come out before that. And this is the first time, I don't know, I would imagine as an artist, the pressure's kind of there. You just got signed to a big label. Like, I don't know, like, are you going to flop? Are you actually going to, I guess, I think I read somewhere too that they did all the recordings in like 2 to 3 weeks, which I couldn't imagine doing. Like, that's just crazy that they got it done that quickly, and boom, it's a masterpiece.
Yeah, and there are like so many, I mean, I guess before, I go into the next question that I planned, I am curious, like, obviously everyone knows the hits from Dookie, right? Mm-hmm. But were there any like I'm not gonna say like deep tracks because it's a pretty well known album, but are there any like lesser known songs on that album that you really like connect to or that you really enjoy?
The one at the very end, is it All by Myself?
I think so. Is that the bonus track?
It's the bonus track.
Yeah.
Like, I listened to the whole thing, and I'm not gonna lie, a lot of it, I mean, as a musician, and we'll get into this maybe a little bit later, but I find them very simplistic in the way they write. Not to any fault of theirs, and critiquing in any way, but a lot of it kind of blends together for me. But that song kind of stood out at the end, where I was like, oh, it's kind of different, and they're just
they're actual musicians.
Yeah, they're just kind of messing around and throwing stuff at the wall, and it's kind of good.
So, obviously the subject of the episode is what their signature 90s song is, but how would you define their music in the 90s versus the 2000s?
Maybe I have a weird take on this, but I don't find it all too different, like the Roots. I'm not saying that they didn't grow, mature. Obviously, at the end of the 90s, as they were kind of declining, they were messing around with ska and other different genres and things like that. And I respect them a lot for doing that. But between, I guess, the two pillars that we talked about, American Idiot and Dookie, their roots didn't change. Everything's kind of the same from the 90s to the 2000s. I think the 90s was just more raw, and they were just kind of the first people to do it the way they did, which was they were kind of isolated on their own island, I guess you could say, at that time period.
Yeah, it's super interesting because they were super accessible, yet at the same time, their music still was aggressive and abrasive and, irreverent. But somehow it was able to, it's their earworms.
Yeah, it's weird that you can talk about it that way, right? Because it's so simple. I think what works for them is, you had the punk groups that they kind of grew up alongside it with, the Bad Religion, and then what's the band with Fat Mike? No FX. It was an Offspring and kind of that griminess. But then they were also what made way for the Sum 41s and the Blinks to kind of make it to the mainstream too. And they're kind of somewhere right in the middle of those two, where it's accessible for the general audience, but it's also got a little bit of that grit still, which is kind of cool.
Exactly, for sure. Billy Joe Armstrong, I feel like I kind of feel guilty about, because when I think of Green Day, I think of Billy Joe Armstrong.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that's what most people would say.
And because obviously his influence in the band is clearly second to none. But what are your thoughts on him, not only as a guitarist but also a songwriter? I don't know if you got a chance to consider his songwriting chops, but what are your thoughts on him overall?
Overall, he's super interesting, and then it kind of feeds into the way they play, right? He doesn't write overly complicated riffs. A lot of it, for the music theory people that might be listening in, it's a lot of 4-to-1s, but it's the hits. It's kind of the enunciations, and he's telling a story, obviously, every time they put a song together. So it's not overly complicated, but if everyone was able to do it, you would have more Green Days, and there aren't. So that's just kind of the magic of what they did.
Yeah,
what he did, obviously.
It was interesting because I was reading articles and after the success of Kerplunk, or the relative success, the major labels were lining up because these guys are the best band. And I'm thinking back to what was going on in the early 90s. It was what made them the best? And I can't put my finger on it, but they were amazing.
Yeah, it's simple, but also different in a way. I know we're hammering on that a little bit, but every song, and I was trying this with I don't know, the first 15 seconds of a Green Day song. I actually did this test before we were kind of going to talk about this today, but you can tell it's Green Day. Even if he hasn't started singing it, you can kind of tell it's Green Day.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. It was I think we might have talked about this, but there's certain guitarists that when you hear them, for me, who it is. For me, it's Carlos Santana.
Mm-hmm.
You know. But I get the same. I get the same feeling about Green Day.
Mm-hmm.
But really, I didn't realize how great of a singer, a singer-songwriter. Well, I want to say songwriter. I didn't realize how great of a songwriter Billy Joe Armstrong was before doing this. And obviously, I knew he was good, but he's really creative. And I make a line in the monologue where I say he clearly paid attention in high school English class.
Yes. For all the school that he said that he wasn't a part of, he actually paid attention to some parts. And this is going to be my first horrible take of the podcast, but I get little bits and pieces of John Lennon when he's kind of, I know they don't do the same thing. I know John Lennon's on a completely different echelon probably of songwriting to some people, but I feel like the way their voices kind of pierce through the music and the way they're I don't know, it's maybe the timbre of the way they sing, but it's weird. I was listening back and forth between them the last couple of days, and I was like, yo, they kind of sound a little similar. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that the Beatles influenced him quite a bit, and I know that he did a cut. Well, it's not he, but Green Day did a cover of "Working Class Hero," which was a John Lennon solo song. One of his more lesser known. I think that was off the Plastic Ono album.
Mm-hmm. And Trey Cool's favorite drummer is Ringo.
That is. I'm so glad you said that, because that is great. Segue into my next question: how fucking good is Trey Cool?
He's so good, man, and it's kind of in the same way that we were talking about Billy, where it's he's not the most technically talented drummer of all time. He looks up to a lot of those guys. You can listen to interviews, and he's aware of the best of the best, and he knows his stuff. But It was cool. He was on the Howard Stern show, like, I think recently, like, a reel came up, and I was listening to him talk, and he was like, there's a lot of drummers out there that don't exactly listen. They like to kind of pierce through the music. He didn't name anybody, but you kind of think of Travis Barker. You kind of think of Lars from Metallica. It's like they kind of want it to be about them a little bit more, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. But with Trey, he's so chill. He's just happy back there doing what needs to be done on the kit, and that's what makes their song so cool, because he's not overdoing it.
Well, what's amazing is that he's able to keep up that energy. And
Yeah.
like as a drummer myself, who struggles, when the BPMs exceed 150, the fact that he's able to play like a 2-hour concert,
Yeah.
and maintain that speed is pretty incredible. Plus, like his fills are a lot more difficult than you would anticipate. Like the speed is incredible.
The speed's incredible. His timing's really, really good. Like, you watch them live, and I think that's another thing that makes, I know it's kind of alluding back to what we talked about. I think that's also what makes Green Day so good, is that, in the studio, they don't sound different than they do live, because they're not doing too much. And Trey, they're not doing too much. And
That was such a backhanded compliment. And I know you didn't intend it that way. That just sounded hilarious to me. It was like, they sound great live, because, how can you not sound great live with how shitty the music is that you make?
It's not shitty. They're just not doing a whole lot else.
Yeah.
And Trey, to ring it back in, Trey's, like you said, for 2 hours, he's back there grinning, having a good time, and making sure that everybody feels good in the band that way too.
Yeah, have you seen Green Day?
I've never seen them live. I've heard them.
They're coming to Truist Park in August.
They came to Truist Park, I want to say a few years ago.
Yeah, Russell went.
And I messed up, because I lived right where, for the people listening, I lived right by the ballpark, so I could literally hear the concert, and I was like, dang, probably should have went.
I think, well, here's my issue, and I think we've talked about this before, but it's like, I don't like concerts at baseball stadiums.
I get that, because it's just so big.
Well, it's big, but also it's like, no, I only saw one baseball stadium concert. I saw Foo Fighters, the first time I saw Foo Fighters.
Didn't know that.
And there was like, the stage was in center field, and you had like, some people congregating in front of the stage, and then the infield was completely clear. There was nobody allowed there, because I guess they didn't want to mess up the infield dirt. And then you had the rest of the people like in the stands behind, and it was just so fragmented. It did not make for like a really like pleasant concert experience.
Dude, that's the least rock and roll thing ever. Yeah. Oh, we didn't want to mess up the dirt.
Yeah.
That's lame.
I'm just like, what are you doing? And like, so I'm probably gonna not go to that concert, because like if they're playing at State Farm, I'd go. But
yeah. When are they coming back? Is it like relatively soon?
I think when they're coming to Truist.
Yeah.
I think it's like end of August, like August 28th or something like that.
Okay, we'll go. We'll have another podcast. We'll talk about it.
Okay. Well, we'll get like the nosebleeds.
Yeah, baseball parks suck ass. Still wasn't good from up there either.
Anyways,
yeah.
Why do you think Green Day is the household name that they are? Now, before you answer that, I just like want to tell you when I was like reflecting on Green Day's prominence and their popularity. I went on Spotify, and they have, I think, 29 million monthly listeners, which is incredible for a band that hasn't really had a hit in a very long time. But for me, they're like, especially with, post 1990, bands that rose to prominence. I mean, they're up there with like, I can only think of two other bands that are bigger, the Chili Peppers and Nirvana. And even the Chili Peppers, you can make an argument who's like more popular. Yeah. Like, they really are, for our generation, they're like up there with Zeppelin and the Stones and all of that, and it's incredible. And like, so why do you think, like, how did that happen?
Yeah, it's so interesting because you're comparing them to Red Hot Chili Peppers and Nirvana a little bit, and we talked about Nirvana, how it was like, well, they were only there for 3 years or 4 years, and it's like that's why they were so cool to us, because it was like kind of ominous the way they kind of came and went. And like you just said, Green Day was here for a minute. I think part of it has to do with their personalities, and we haven't touched on this yet, but they've remained together.
Yes.
A lot of bands will like, oh, we're going to go start our own side project, which they did. I mean, I think they all did separate things, but they kept Green Day going. For the most of the entirety of the last, whatever it is, 20, 30 years at this point, yeah. But they've all been together, and they all seem to still enjoy playing with each other, which goes a long way.
You know what's wild? And I didn't know this until I did an episode. You know another band that's like that has like had like the same lineup forever, was Radiohead.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And they've been around since a little bit. Well, I guess same time period. I guess right, even before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Radiohead's first album was 92,
Okay.
and their first album was 1990 or 91.
Yeah.
So
it's impressive that these bands are able to stick together that long because obviously we probably don't meet as much as them or play as much music, but it's hard to keep a band like for us going for like what is it 4 or 5 years now. So I couldn't imagine 30 years and like you're together every day and you're doing these crazy tours and you have probably creative differences from time to time, but to swallow it and just continue going. It's a testament to how cool they are with each other.
Absolutely, and it's like. And even like with the Chili Peppers, they've had that kind of that quartet that everyone knows, Frusciante, Kiedis, Smith, and Flea.
Yeah.
But Frusciante from time to time likes to go away and then come back.
He'll come back.
He'll come back. But by the way, I just want my friend, like one of my best friends, Dylan Lancaster. He's a huge Radiohead fan. I don't think he gives Green Day the time of day. I'm just really glad that he heard me compare Green Day with Radiohead.
It happened right there at whatever this is, the 30-minute mark. It took that long, but we're there.
We're there. I'm so happy, and I hope other hipsters are listening and heard me compare Green Day to Radiohead. And you alluded to this earlier, but have you noticed Green Day's influence on other bands that you like or are familiar with?
Yeah, I think a lot of people tried to copy them. I mean, not copy them per se, but they kind of use the same simplistic formula, like what you kind of alluded to. Maybe we were talking about this before we started the podcast, but power chords, kind of like these big open choruses where everybody can just kind of sing along. And people realize kind of mixing the punk along with like the pop. I don't want to call them pop punk. They're not pop punk, but they kind of were the original pop punk in a way.
I mean, I consider them a pop punk band more than really any. I think like Green Day and The Offspring.
Yeah.
Are the two, they're, to me, those are like the godfathers of pop punk. And I know Rancid as well, but like they were big, I think, at one point, but not like The Offspring, Green Day level.
Exactly. And then like, I guess, sing along stuff, like to the masses, everybody was, you can get into it, you can tap your foot, you can headbang, whatever you want to do to enjoy the music. And it was kind of interesting. I don't know if we talked about this when we were talking about Gilman Street, but like, I remember hearing that like, they like were kind of banished from that area after they kind of made it big. Like people didn't like it. People didn't like that they'd kind of been commercialized in a sense.
Well, there's a song that I'd recommend checking out from Insomniac, which I think that's actually my favorite Green Day album, Insomniac.
Interesting.
I just think I think cover to cover every song's a banger, and they were going through a really tough time, like mental health wise.
Yeah.
And as you know, that always makes for great songwriting.
That's when the best of the best comes out of you for sure.
But they have a song on that album called 86.
86.
And the chorus, it's so catchy. I'm surprised they didn't make it a single. It's like there's no return to 86, and it's about that. It's about that experience, about like being banned from 924 Gilman Street, and they performed it on Letterman, and I don't think I've ever seen that band so angry, and I think you can really you can really see how angry they were with the situation.
That's a really good point too, because I never seen that performance. I'm gonna definitely look it up. But other things to come back to your question, I feel like they put everything they can into their performances. You can feel the energy and the emotion behind what they're doing too. It doesn't feel fake.
Oh yeah, and the violence in which Armstrong strums his guitar.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't know how he's been able to do that for so many years, but God bless him.
There's two performances. There's one where it was like, I think it was the 94 Woodstock where you watch him just detune his guitar and then he's just started strumming it because he's mad. I don't know if he's mad, maybe just getting into it with the crowd throwing mud at him and he's making it into a game. And then there's like, I think this was later on in their careers, but it was like the iHeartRadio thing where I remember they cut him off and then he just started.
Well, he was high on crystal meth, right?
Didn't know that.
Which reading quite a bit about it, I didn't realize how extensively he used crystal meth. Like I talk about it in the monologue, so I apologize for people who have to hear the story again. But when he wrote Basket Case, he had written it as a love song. And with the same like melody and chord progression and whatnot, and he was high on crystal meth when he did it. And when he came down, he like played it again. He's like, "Wow, this sucks."
Dang, that's crazy. Because I always knew like obviously their name, and then I didn't know. I knew he went to rehab. I knew he probably did hard drugs. I knew Mike, their bassist. I knew he wrote Longview. I'm pretty sure on acid. I think, or the bass line. I think he like there was an interview where he did that when he was tripping. But I didn't realize he was going through a rough time when he was writing Bass Case and doing all that. They were pretty young, man. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, he had a pretty turbulent, like, when he was coming of age, I think it was a pretty turbulent time for him. I know that, like, he moved out of his mom's house as soon as he could and, like, lived in a really, like, tough area, which is, like, what Welcome to Paradise is about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's definitely, like, I feel like I'm surprised that he's still kicking it, like, with the amount of shit that he's been through and the amount of shit that he's put in his body.
Looks good.
But yeah,
good.
he looks younger than we do.
I know, right?
He's one of those guys that doesn't age.
No, dude, I watched a bit. I think the same reel I was telling you about where they were getting interviewed recently. I'm like, dude, he's like 50, in his 50s. He's got to be now, and he still looks the same. It's crazy.
Anyways, I know I asked a question like this just a few minutes ago, but this is kind of a little bit more like of a broader question.
Mm-hmm.
But where do you think Green Day ranks? I mean, I kind of gave my opinion on the matter, but where do you think Green Day ranks among the greatest rock bands of all time? So, like, 60s and onwards, where are we putting Green Day? Are they top 5, top 10, top 20, top 30? Where are they at?
Off the top of my head, this is one I didn't really think about. I'm just kind of thinking on the spot right here.
And you can give a ballpark. Like, I'm not expecting like an exact number or anything, but
they've got to be in my, at least, this is niche, top 13. I'm not leaving them outside of like my top 13 bands of all time, or rock bands since the 60s, because like we've kind of talked about, there's not one person you're gonna meet on the street that hasn't heard of Green Day. That's not, I guess, 6 or above or 7 years older.
Yeah. Well, this is the way that I put it. My students are mainly into contemporary stuff, and they're mainly into rap music, right?
Yeah.
And we've had such great conversations about Kendrick and J. Cole and all those people, and we'll talk about 90s rap. But there are, and they're not real big into rock music, but there are certain rock bands that they do enjoy and they at least respect. The Beatles obviously is one of them. The Chili Peppers is another one. Nirvana, and then the one other one that they mention is Green Day. And I have a student that she has a Dookie shirt. She always wears it.
It's cool because like a lot of these kids probably haven't listened to them, or they've probably heard American Idiot and think they listen to Green Day. But it's like, it's in that Nirvana category where it's like, oh, they have a shirt at Target, I'm going to wear the shirt because I know they're good.
Yes. I feel like if you have a shirt at Target, you are on like the top echelon. You know
I can wear it, and we're far enough removed from that time period now where it's kind of cool. It's kind of edgy to wear.
Yeah, it's full circle. It was like we talked about butt rock for the longest time. It was like you couldn't listen to Nickelback, and now it's like, fuck yeah, listen to Nickelback.
Oh, if you don't, dude, what are you doing?
Come on.
Have you been on your reels or your TikTok, brother?
Seriously. So what is your, of the, are you familiar enough with the 90s Green Day albums to talk about them, or?
Ish.
Okay.
I know Nimrod, I know Dookie, and I think this is entering the 2000s, but I know Warning.
All right, so let's include Warning. So let's do pre-American Idiot.
Okay.
What's your favorite Green Day album?
Oh, Dookie. Yeah, I think because that one starts with Burnout, right?
Yep.
And I like to kind of,
so good.
I've listened to it through a few times, and I'm like, oh, like imagine hearing this for the first time. Yeah. It's hard to put you in that spot, but the whole album, it gets, from a musician standpoint, I kind of alluded to this, it gets a little repetitive because it's like they're not really changing too much what they're doing, but it's good. It's really catchy, and it's just, it pumps you up no matter what kind of mood you're in.
But could you imagine like being your angsty teenage self, and like all of a sudden like you get Dookie because you hear about this band Green Day, and the first line that you hear is, "I declare I don't care no more."
Yeah, man.
Like, oh my god.
Wait a second, I'm in for something here.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah, and then I think it's She. That's one of, how like you have like albums where you've got like the bangers of the album, but there's that one song that's really good that like you don't hear. It's like every once in a blue moon it'll come on. It's like, oh yeah, that one's there too, and it's also really good. That's She for me.
We want to know a fun fact about She is that the song was inspired by his girlfriend in the early '90s, and that is she ended up breaking off the relationship because she moved to Ecuador, and that breakup is the inspiration for Good Riddance, Time of Your Life.
That's full circle. Yeah. Whoa. Dude, they played Good Riddance at, like, this is way off topic, but they played Good Riddance at my 5th grade graduation, and like I kind of think I made that song about me. Like that's what I think. I think of graduation. I think of like going on to different things, but that makes way more sense.
Well, I think that's another reason why like Green Day has become so transcendent is that they have so many crossover hits. Like obviously that being an example.
Yeah. Brain Stew came later too, right? Because I know Good Riddance was on.
No, Brain Stew came after, or Brain Stew came before Good Riddance.
Brain Stew came before Good Riddance, but after Dookie, right?
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. I would say like that's like probably that's their biggest rock hit. Not on Dookie of the 90s.
Got it.
I would say.
I mean, everyone learned that one in guitar class.
Oh my
man.
God. Well, I call that in the monologue. I say that riff is one of the all-time great riffs.
It's kind of that Smoke on the Water.
Yep.
I'm not gonna play Smoke on the Water, but I am gonna play Brain Stew.
Yeah. It's another song about crystal meth.
That makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
A lot of this I'm learning right here, right now, which is pretty cool.
Just when in doubt, the song is about crystal meth.
When in doubt.
And so we talked about favorite 90s albums. What are some of your favorite 90s Green Day songs? And you can also just talk about your favorite songs in general, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I kind of jumped the gun and was talking about some of my favorites. Basket Case's awesome. I like Longview. I like Longview probably more than the average Green Day fan. I just think it's a super funny song because I'm pretty sure it's about like whacking off and stuff like
it's
that.
It's about,
right?
Yep. It's exactly what it's about. It's about smoking weed, jerking off.
And just being a lazy bum all day. And it kind of gets to that point where you're like, what am I doing? And I think because when you first listen to that song, let's take the lyrics out. You don't think it's a song about that. You think it's a song about like adventure or like, I don't know, going on a journey.
Yeah, let's go to paradise.
And it's the exact opposite of what, the lyrics are conveying, obviously. I think those two are up there for me. Brain Stew I mentioned already. Hitch a Ride was good.
Oh, that's a great song.
I like Hitch a Ride.
That might like in terms of like skill and originality, that might be their best 90s song.
And it came later. That was that
90s. That was Nimrod.
Nimrod, yeah. Nimrod, I didn't really give a chance to. I don't think until honestly this past couple of months, or even this month, maybe when you said, "Hey, we're gonna do Green Day," we were talking about it a little bit, and like I'd obviously listened to them, but I never listened to their albums all the way through, honestly. And Nimrod, I was like, "Dang, I'm surprised people were talking about them on the come down, like at this point of their careers, because this is still pretty good music to me." I don't know.
Oh yeah. And what's interesting, because like I feel like a lot of people kind of throw Nimrod under the bus a little bit, and they kind of like signal it kind of signaled like their 90s decline a little bit. But you had some, unbelievable songs. Obviously, you had "Time of Your Life" on there, and you have "Hitchin' a Ride," "Nice Guys Finish Last."
Nice Guys Finish Last.
Great song. And so now the moment that everyone's been waiting for. What do you consider Green Day's signature song?
This one was not that hard for me. I really do think it's Boulevard of Broken Dreams.
No. I'm sorry. Signature 90s song.
That's my signature overall song for them. Sorry. Signature 90s song has got to be, it's Basket Case. It's Basket Case.
Yeah, that's what I chose. And it's like, I think for me, usually, like I just kind of hope that my analysis brings me to a song that isn't their most popular song, so I can make a hot take and get people to make having discussions. Mm-hmm. But there's just no way that Basket Case is not their signature song, just in every way.
Well, that song comes on and people the lyrics by heart, even if you're not a Green Day fan. Like, do you have the time? Like people in a bar, people if you hear, I don't know where else you're hearing that one in public. Bar's kind of unfortunately the first place I go, but you enjoy it when it comes on. Maybe we cover it one day. You hear it from Separate Checks, but
shameless plug, Separate Checks. One day they will have songs out on Spotify.
Is there actually? Didn't you say we should cover Welcome to Paradise? We didn't talk about that one too much, but that one's pretty good too.
Yeah, Welcome to Paradise. Like if I was just kind of like going at it from like a Green Day fan base point of view, I might say Welcome to Paradise is their signature song. Mm-hmm. But I think like when you kind of like are more inclusive to different audiences, I think like Basket Case is just you can't really you can't deny its prominence, like not only within Green Day, but also just like 90s music in general.
Yeah, dude. You know what's crazy? I think by the end of the podcast, I figured out the actual first time I heard Green Day. This is crazy. So, Welcome to Paradise was a song, I'm pretty sure, in the movie Surf's Up. It was an animated movie about penguins surfing. Great movie. I was like 10. I'm pretty sure that song was used in the movie. So that was probably my first actual experience with Green Day. I'm glad we got there.
And what movie was it?
Surf's Up. I mean, it's a kid's movie, but it's pretty clever, actually. Shia LaBeouf's the main character. He's a penguin. He just wants to go. He lives in Antarctica, and he wants to go surf big waves down in like the islands with all the other penguins that are good at surfing. And the first time they get to the island where like all the other surfers are, it's playing Welcome to Paradise. And that's probably the first time I heard it in the theater. I was definitely boogieing to it. So,
all right, well, folks, we're gonna leave you with imagining Shia LaBeouf's voice in a children's surf movie.
He does a great job.
You know, with Green Day's music as the soundtrack in the background.
Dude, I'm showing you the video after this.
But anyways, Ryan Gilman, for I think this is the 7th episode that you will be a part of. And as always, you did a tremendous job, and as always, I had a phenomenal time. But yeah, man, thank you so much as always, and I'm very excited that you are now the official co-host of Hot Cakes from a 90s Stand. Well, so we'll see you back in a few episodes.
Thank you for keeping me reeled in. I'm excited to be here and be the creative mastermind behind all future episodes. I'll be taking point here, folks. Thank you very much, Dove. Great to see you.
All right, man. Take care. Thanks, y'all, so much for listening. And since Ryan is now co-host, I don't have to thank him. Hooray. Anyways, have a great rest of your day, and whatever it brings, hopefully music is involved. Again, I'm Dove Brenner, and this is Hot Cakes from a 90s Stand. Take care.